Fox News Alert, our nation's top law enforcement official on the hot seat today, as we've been showing you Attorney General Jeff Sessions hit with some tough questions from his former colleagues during a routine oversight hearing. Senators grilling him on everything from his conversations with President Trump to the firing of former FBI Director James Comey, his hardline stance on immigration and anti-discrimination laws. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today, Harris Faulkner, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, former deputy spokesperson for the State Department Marie Harf, and today's hashtag one lucky guy, Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he is outnumbered, and it is great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you guys. We have so much to get through, some of it happening right under our noses.
And I know you've been watching every minute of it, so let's get started. Attorney General Jeff Sessions going before the Senate Judiciary Committee for the first time as our nation's top law enforcement official. Lawmakers questioning him on everything from the travel ban to immigration to voting rights and Russia. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live from Capitol Hill. Catherine?
Well, Sandra, we're entering hour 3 of this oversight hearing here on Capitol Hill, and they've really been covering the waterfront, immigration, DACA, the opioid crisis. But there's certainly one issue that Republicans and Democrats have agreed on. They wanted more answers from the Attorney General about his role and knowledge of the firing of the former FBI Director James Comey.
The American people have a right to know why he was fired, especially in the middle of so many high-profile issues going on, including the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election.
It's important, I believe, to understand what role you had in this process, including conversations with the president and others in the White House.
Last hour, senior Democrat Senator Leahy said to the Attorney General that he felt Sessions had misled the committee about his contacts with the Russians. The Attorney General said there may have been casual contacts or conversations with the Russian ambassador, but there was no coordination or collusion with the Russians to help the Trump campaign. We also had a series of questions from the senior ranking Democrat on the committee, Dianne Feinstein. She wanted to know from the Attorney General whether the president had ever discussed lifting the Russian cloud that hung over his administration in reference to the Comey firing. And the Attorney General said that many of these issues he could not discuss because of the confidential nature of those conversations.
I can neither assert executive privilege nor can I disclose today the content of my confidential conversations with the president. Under the administration of both parties, it is well established that a president is entitled to have private, confidential communications.
Over on the House Intelligence Committee, we've had a significant development this morning with 2 of the principals from an opposition research firm, Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS matters because it was the firm that commissioned the unverified anti-Trump dossier that was really one of the linchpins that kickstarted the FBI Russia investigation last year. Peter Fritsch, and Thomas Catan, these are 2 of the principals in Fusion, have been behind closed doors at the House Intelligence Committee, and they have taken the fifth to every question that was posed to them about their role in putting that dossier together. Glenn Simpson, who is one of the founders of Fusion GPS, he's under subpoena to appear before the committee at a later date, but based on everything we've learned from his communications to the committee through his attorney, they do expect him to also take the fifth. A couple of things that jumped out at the Sessions hearing this morning is that on some of these really key issues, whether it's the Clinton email case or it's the Russia case, the Attorney General said that he's knocked himself out of the box on this. During his confirmation hearing, he said he would not get involved in the Clinton email investigation because of the statements he had made during the campaign about the Clinton email case. And then on Russia, he has also recused himself. So those decisions largely, he said, completely rested with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. Sandra.
Catherine Herridge, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's dig right into this this particular point, the Attorney General defending the firing of the former FBI Director James Comey.
You know, it's very frustrating to the senators in both parties and to those of us watching when he doesn't give a substantive answer. But the answer he's giving is the right one. The president is entitled to know that he can speak to his cabinet officers without the press or the public or another branch of government intruding into that conversation. So though I myself am yearning for an answer and wishing he would give a substantive answer, did you decide to fire him, or did the president ask you to come up with a reason to justify the firing? The Attorney General has given the right answer. Having said that, the president gave 3 versions of firing him. 1, he dropped the ball on Mrs. Clinton, and I didn't like the way he handled it. 2, the Russian thing. 3, he's a showboat and a hot dog. The president's words, not mine. Can you drag the Attorney General into this? No. Why do the Democrats want to drag him into it? Because one of these is of great interest to Bob Mueller, and that is, quote, the Russian thing. So what they want to get Jeff Sessions to say is, Donald Trump told me to do something to stop the Russian investigations, but he's not going to answer that, because even if the president said it, the president is entitled to have that kind of conversation kept secret.
Well, let me ask you a question. Bob Mueller hasn't interviewed Jeff Sessions yet. I think he said he has not spoken to him yet. Can Bob Mueller ask him in a closed interview to divulge that information?
Yes, and if he refuses, then they can this is unseemly, but it has happened, bring him before a grand jury, and if he refuses there, they can get a federal judge to order him to answer, because the grand jury proceeding is secret.
But doesn't the president have the authority, regardless what the reason is, to fire Comey?
Yes.
So isn't that the heart of the answer right there in the most important aspect?
It is. The Mueller investigation is to determine whether that authority was used for and I'm going to use the language of the statute, corrupt purpose. If it was used for a corrupt purpose, an example would be to get the FBI off of my back, then it would be an improper use of that authority, and that might be a part of the puzzle of whatever Mueller's putting together.
All right, we'll keep monitoring this hearing. Meanwhile, Attorney General Sessions defended the travel ban today. He did so after 2 judges ruled against President Trump's latest version of the ban. Starting today, it would have barred certain people from Syria, Libya, Iran, Yemen, Chad, Somalia, North Korea, and Venezuela from coming into the country. First, a federal judge in Hawaii temporarily blocked it from going into effect for all of those countries except North Korea and Venezuela, writing in his decision it plainly discriminates based on nationality. A second judge in Maryland also blocking it, writing in his ruling the initial announcement of the Muslim ban, offered repeatedly and explicitly through President Trump's own statements, forcefully and persuasively expressed his purpose in unequivocal terms. Again, new restrictions on travel from North Korea and Venezuela were not impacted. The White House is planning to appeal, saying in a statement blocking the ban from going into effect undercuts the president's efforts to keep the American people safe and enforce minimum security standards for entry into the United States. A lot to get to.
All right, so I read both opinions. We examined them upstairs before the show started, and these judges have begun to call it the Muslim ban, which is very, very unusual for the judiciary to be so disrespectful and
or political.
And political.
Yeah, the disrespect is one thing. That falls in the category of what your grandmother can fix.
Here's a mistake.
But political.
Here's a mistake that the government made, and I've never seen this in the years that I was on the bench. The government said to the federal judge in Maryland, we have a report from the Department of Homeland Security demonstrating how dangerous the likely propensity is of refugees from this country. And the report also shows how the danger would be diminished if we block everybody from coming in, except for those who have bona fide relationships. The judge, let me see the report. The U.S. attorney, we're not showing it to you. Now, I've never seen that before, because the judge will examine the report in what we call in camera, in secret, in private, and decide whether or not it comes to the conclusion the government wants him to, says it comes to. By not showing him the report, the judge concludes quite properly it doesn't come to the conclusion that they say it came to. So he stops the order for the ban from coming into effect.
We got a lot of judges. We're glad we have one on the couch. Let me just put that out there. How would you have looked at that differently, though? Because what you're saying is the judge wasn't given all of the information that he needed to see, i.e. the report.
I would have ordered them. I wouldn't have asked them. I would have ordered them to give it to me so that I could look at it.
Well, why didn't he do that?
I don't know why he did it. But the rule of thumb is if a party has evidence that they say will help them and they don't produce it, you assume that it would not help them. Otherwise, they would produce it.
Which is common sense. And I think the other thing this shows us yet again is that President Trump's statements, including his tweets, do have consequences. And that I'm not saying they should or shouldn't legally. You're the expert on that. I'm not. But clearly these judges, they entered it into evidence and they put it in their ruling that how could they not listen to some of the things he said as he was describing this travel ban?
But shouldn't a president be treated differently when he's in office than what he said when he was a candidate?
Yes.
So I would step in and add this to what you're saying, though, Maria, because if you are saying that his tweets have an efficacy in all of this and they're effective with shaping the message, then clearly if they're using labels like Muslim ban, they're watching other media. They're getting some information coming from everywhere. And in all fairness, if they're going to get it from everywhere, then how can you single out one as being most important?
They did use some of his tweets from since he's been president, which is the key difference here, because the White House had to come out and say, yes, those are official statements.
All right, get Lisa in for just...
Well, I was going to say, my understanding of this is they've done an extensive review on document sharing from other countries and have determined what they deem appropriate from these countries. They shared that information with them. If they did not comply, then they got put on this list. You look at places like North Korea. You look at places like Somalia, where they just had a massive terror attack a couple of days ago. And my question to you, Judge, real quick, how is this legally different than President Obama taking a 2015 law, expanding upon it, and adding various countries to it?
All right,
legally, what's the difference?
If there was not the religious aspect to it, it would be upheld by this court.
All right. See, only judge can just,
See what I'm saying? We got a lot of judges. Glad we have our own.
Yeah, I know. We've got to move on. The Republican budget taking center stage today. It has to pass to pave the way for the Republicans' tax reform plan. Whether the party and the White House are going to be able to actually get it done. And if they don't, what happens next? And new calls for former FBI Chief James Comey to testify again after fresh questions over his handling of Hillary Clinton's email probe. The president tweeting today that the fix was in all along. Is he right? Will we ever get answers?
Hill now. Senator Al Franken is talking with the Attorney General Jeff Sessions about Russia and whether or not he had meetings. He was part of that original conversation on the Hill. Let's watch together.
Russians at any time to discuss any political campaign. On Twitter, you said, quote, I never met with any Russian officials to discuss issues of the campaign. So, confronted with the truth, you started to qualify your answer. Later, in a letter you sent to this committee to clarify your testimony and to disclose 2 of your 3 meetings, you wrote, quote, I do not recall any discussions with the Russian ambassador or any other representative of the Russian government regarding the political campaign on these occasions or any other occasions. But this summer, the Washington Post reported that American intelligence agencies intercepted communications between the Russian ambassador and Moscow, in which he described 2 of his conversations with you. The April meeting at the Mayflower Hotel and the July meeting at the Republican National Convention. Citing both former and current U.S. officials, the intercepts reportedly indicate that you had, quote, substantive, unquote, discussions on policy matters important to Moscow. According to officials familiar with Russian intelligence reports, the ambassador was well known for accurately relaying his interactions with U.S. officials back to the Kremlin. Attorney General Sessions, in response to this report, the Justice Department declined to comment on the veracity of the intelligence intercepts, but DOJ did assert that you did, quote, not discuss interference in the election, which is also how you describe your communications to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So again, the goalpost has been moved. First it was, I did not have communications with Russians, which was not true. Then it was, I never met with any Russians to discuss any political campaign, which may or may not be true. Now it's, I did not discuss interference in the campaign, which further narrows your initial blanket denial about meeting with the Russians. Since you have qualified your denial to say that you did not, quote, discuss issues of the campaign with Russians, what, in your view, constitutes issues of the campaign?
Well, let me just say this without hesitation, that I conducted no improper discussions with Russians at any time regarding a campaign or any other item facing this country.
Okay, how do you know?
I want to say that first. And that's been the suggestion that you've raised and others, that it was somehow we had conversations that were improper.
May I suggest that...
No. You had a long time, Senator Franken. I'd like to respond.
Okay.
I think I have a...
We'll note that Senator Cruz went 2 minutes over, so I don't want... they're going to cut me off, and so I want to ask you some questions.
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't have to sit in here and listen to his...
You're the one who testified
without having a chance to respond. Give me a break.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Take whatever.
It was not a simple question, Senator Franken.
I'm sorry?
It was not a simple question. The lead-in to your question was very, very troubling. And I answered to you in a way that I felt was responsive to what you raised in your question. Let me read it to you. You said, CNN has just published a story, meaning that day, while we were in the hearing, that none of us had heard about.
Keep reading.
And I'm telling you this about this news story that's just been published. I'm not expecting you to know whether or not it's true, but CNN just published a story alleging that the intelligence community, that's of the United States of America, provided documents to the president-elect last week that included information that, quote, Russian operatives claim to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. You went on to say these documents also allegedly say, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Now, again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so you know. But if it's true, it's obviously extremely serious. And if there's any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do? So, taken aback by this dramatic statement that I'd never heard before and knew nothing about, I responded this way. Senator Franken, I'm not aware of those activities. I have been called a surrogate a time or two in this campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it. I don't think that can fairly be interpreted as saying I never had conversations with any Russians. It was referring directly to the suggestion that there was a continuing exchange of information between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government, which did not happen, at least not to my knowledge, and not with me. And that's why I responded the way I do. And I'm disappointed. Yes, you can say what you want to about the accuracy of it, but I think it was a good faith response to a dramatic event at the time. And I don't think it's fair for you to suggest otherwise.
3 minutes and then finish?
He took more than 3 minutes.
No, he didn't.
Yeah.
It took about 2.5. Well, go.
No.
How much do you want? I don't want to take a lot of time bargaining with you.
Well, I didn't take as much time as Senator Franken took.
Hey, let me just deal with Senator Franken. 3 more minutes, please.
Okay, first of all, you said I did not have communications with the Russians. This was about ongoing communications. You had 3 communications with Kislyak. And now you can't recall, with answering Senator Leahy, you can't recall whether you discussed what you discussed with Kislyak.
What I would say to you is,
please.
okay, go ahead. You go make a lot of allegations, Senator. It's hard for me to respond to them in the time I've got.
Can I have a little bit more time? Okay. You said today in response to Senator Leahy that you don't recall whether you talked about the campaign, whether you don't recall whether you talked about issues and Trump's views on issues with Russia. Those are very, very relevant to the campaign, whether a surrogate from the campaign is talking with the Russian ambassador about the candidates' views on Russian policy, especially at the Republican National Convention, at the Mayflower Hotel the day before Trump is going to give his maiden speech on foreign policy. That's very different. Not being able to recall what you discussed with him is very different than saying, I have not had communications with the Russians. The ambassador from Russia is Russian. And how your how your responses morphed from I did not have communications with the Russians to I did not discuss substantive I did not discuss any the political campaign, and then finally going to I did not discuss interference in the election. That to me is moving the goalpost every time. And we're starting off with an extra point, and by the end we're going to a 75-yard field goal. If it has to be us, saying I didn't discuss interfering with the election is your last statement. That's a very different bar than I can tell you I did not meet with any Russians.
Relatively short answer.
So he gets to do about 10 minutes improperly framing this subject, and I'm given a short chance to respond?
Proceed, please. But then we're going to call on Senator
First
Sass.
and foremost, Senator Franken, you and I have had a good relationship on this committee. I would tell my colleagues, I think most of you know, I've committed myself to a high level of public service, to reach the highest standards of ethics and decency in my service, to be honest about things that I say. And so you have now gone through this long talk that I believe is totally unfair to me. It all arose from this question. When it was charged that these documents allegedly say, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates, as if all of them, Trump's surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Isn't that what you said? You're shaking your head.
Don't Trump surrogates.
It said Trump's surrogates. Didn't say some of. Said his surrogates. And I felt a need to respond. And I responded on the spot. We've been 6 hours in the hearing, the end of the day, and I said, I'm not aware of those activities. And I wasn't, and am not. I don't believe they occurred. And I said, I have been called a surrogate a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians. I'm unable to comment on it. I was talking about as a surrogate in the campaign. I didn't have a continuing series, a continuing exchange of information. So now everything else, so now you take that to say if I ever met with a Russian, I've not been candid with the committee, and I reject that.
Senator Sass.
General, thanks for being here. There was some drama there. Sorry to have added to the drama and distracted you for a minute. I was paying enough attention there that I dumped a Dr. Pepper on Senator Cruz, so that's what was distracting us on this side of the dais. I would like to continue talking about the Russians, but in the context of the long-term objectives that Vladimir Putin has to undermine American institutions and the public trust. Obviously, the 2016 election matters a lot, and there are multiple ongoing investigations about that. I'm trying to talk about something slightly different. The longer-term goal that they have, because anybody who reads intelligence, this isn't through the prism of who you voted for in the 2016 election or what you think happened in the 2016 election, as important as all of that is. Anybody who reads intelligence knows that we face a sophisticated, long-term effort by a foreign adversary to undermine our foreign policy and our ability to lead in the world by trying to undermine confidence in American institutions. There's nobody who's reading intelligence right now that doesn't know that Vladimir Putin has that objective. So this shouldn't be this part shouldn't be a Republican versus Democratic issue. Vladimir Putin is an opportunist, which means that any partisan or ideological alignment he has is temporary. He wants to undermine America. And every patriotic American ought to be concerned about that. You listen to certain news outlets, and it sounds like there's a Russian behind everything that's happening in America, and it's laughable. But you listen to other news outlets, and it's seemingly the case that Vladimir Putin is somebody that we should trust, and he has America's best interests at heart, which is more absurd. So I think we know, again, people who are reading intelligence know that Russia's going to be back in 2018. They're going to be back in 2020. And they have goals to undermine American, Democratic, Republican, small r, small d institutions, and to undermine our confidence in these institutions and to exacerbate American on American hatred. We live at a time where info-ops and propaganda and misinformation are a far more cost-effective way for people to try to weaken the United States of America than by thinking they can outspend us at a military level, though we're underinvesting in a lot of military hardware and long-term planning. So as the nation's chief law enforcement officer and as a supervisor of multiple components of our intelligence community, I'm curious about your views on this issue, and I want to ask you a series of questions. The first is, do you think we're doing enough to prepare for future interference by Russia and other foreign adversaries in the information space?
Probably not. We're not. And the matter is so complex that for most of us, we're not able to fully grasp the technical dangers that are out there. We have commercial penetration by some of our toughest trading partners. We've got disruption and interference, it appears, by Russian officials or people, and it requires a real review.
And so, under your leadership, what concrete steps has the department taken or should the department take to learn the lessons of 2016 for the purposes of fighting against future foreign election interference?
Well, we are looking at a number of things. We're specifically intensely reviewing the commercial interference and theft of trade secrets and important data or information that some private companies have spent decades developing in hundreds of millions of dollars and have it stolen in a moment. And we've got indictments that deal with some of those issues. The National Security Division of the Department of Justice has got some really talented people. The FBI has as good a group of experts on sophisticated computer technology as probably exists in the world. But whether we're at the level we need to be yet, I don't think so.
So let's distinguish between two things there in your answer. The first is, I think you were asked earlier if you have confidence in the January 6th, 2017 intelligence community assessment of Russian attempts to interfere in the 2016 election. I had stepped out for a minute, but you agree.
I've never denied. I acknowledge that at my confirmation. Yes.
So you have no reason.
I have no reason to deny that or doubt that.
You have confidence in the integrity and the professionalism of the men and women of the intelligence community.
Yes.
There may be an issue, though, about whether or not our pipeline is robust enough. Do we have enough people coming into the National Security Division? If you were arriving at DOJ today as the Attorney General and you were going to focus on NSD for the first 100 days you're there, talk us through a little bit about how you would prioritize in that space, because my view is that we're investing way too little in the pipeline to be ready for offensive and defensive aspects of cyber writ large, but especially info ops and misinformation campaigns.
Well, the misinformation campaign is something that I'm not sure we're at the bottom of yet, and it needs to continue to be examined. When I was on the Armed Services Committee, I got legislation passed to review our entire Defense Department situation to see how vulnerable we are there. And we have many vulnerabilities in our Defense Department and our missile systems, perhaps. And then we've got the commercial penetration that we have some cases that are ongoing now that validate that concern quite clearly.
So that's looking chiefly at current hardware and software exposures and retrospectively. But do you think the Department of Justice has a proactive role in looking at hardening our democratic process for foreign interference?
You make a valuable point. If you have any legislation or thoughts on that, I would be glad to hear it. And I'm not sure we have a specific review underway at this point in time. Of course, most of this has to be coordinated with the intelligence community, NSA, CIA, the Director of National Intelligence.
Well, I appreciate your responsiveness to me on a number of other issues, so I will follow up with you in a less public forum about that. I'm nearly at time, and I won't ask for precedent of the 13 minutes and 20 seconds, Mr. Chairman, of the questioning that preceded me. But if I can run over by 30 seconds, I would like to just draw to your attention, General, the fact that we have a number of crimes committed by illegal aliens in Nebraska. Some of these are some of the most heartrending crimes you can imagine. But I want to point out that this isn't just a case of cherry-picking particular isolated bad apples. We know that some of the crimes that we're dealing with committed by illegal aliens in the country are dealing with threats that are posed in particular by transnational organizations like MS-13. And I've got a series of questions I'd like to ask you about that, but because we're at time, I'm instead just going to pivot to, would you commit to coordinating a briefing for my team and me on the financing and payment systems used by some of these transnational criminal gangs?
We would be glad to. Transnational criminal organizations has been given to us by the President as a priority for us in prosecutions, and particularly MS-13, and we're giving great attention to it, and we'll be pleased to discuss it with you.
Thanks, General.
Senator Sessions, I wanted to ask for your accommodation. I was going to call on Senator Coons and Senator Tellis.
All right, so we have been watching some of the most fiery moments now of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing that you see Attorney General Jeff Sessions there to the left testifying at today. Most recently, we were watching of Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, and he brought up a lot of issues that have to do, in particular, outside the scope of Russia, which is where it got really heated. And then he and the AG just talked about getting together to discuss some things that are important to the state. Let's pull away from this for now. We have Judge Andrew Napolitano as our hashtag one lucky guy today, and free counsel to us today. We appreciate we won't be getting the bill, because believe me when I tell you this is expertise to parse some of this stuff. No matter which side of the political aisle you're on, Al Franken and Jeff Sessions went at it.
They did, and Senator Franken asked the most aggressive, most poignant, and most challenging questions for the Attorney General. The Attorney General is in a little bit of a box. I mean, he's already the Attorney General. He doesn't need their approval to stay in office, but he knows he's sworn to tell the truth. He also knows he cannot mislead them. So sometimes telling a sterile, brief truth can leave a misleading interpretation in the mind of the questioner. That is an independent crime, misleading Congress, and he can't do that. So Senator Franken asks a 5-part question,
right?
And General Sessions answers 3 of the parts. Is he conceding the other 2 he didn't address? Some of this is for political consumption back home in Minnesota
on
for
the
Senator
part
Franken.
Al
right.
Franken.
Others of it makes you wonder, is Jeff Sessions tongue-tied, or can he get an answer?
Real quickly, you and I, while it was going on, I said, does he need personal counsel? And you said,
yes.
Why?
Because I think he needs an unbiased, non-Justice Department, bright legal mind to help him sift through some of these things. It would be unusual, but it wouldn't be unprecedented.
It continues, and we will dip in and out as it makes news, obviously. President Trump, meanwhile, is tweeting that new documents show fired FBI Director James Comey, one of the topics at that hearing today, quote, protected Hillary Clinton. And the email investigation was a fix. Is it time for Comey to testify again? And what would you ask him? Hump day sizzle, baby. Growing calls for fired FBI Director James Comey to return to Congress and testify about new documents showing Comey began drafting a letter on his conclusion in the Hillary Clinton email probe months before interviewing several key witnesses, including Hillary Clinton. House Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy among those demanding answers.
The chronology does not add up. His answers have been all over the map to both the Intelligence Committee and the clip you just played from Oversight. So we need to talk to him again.
And here's the exchange that Gowdy was referring to back in September of last year.
Did you make the decision not to recommend criminal charges relating to classified information before or after Hillary Clinton was interviewed by the FBI on July the 2nd?
After.
Okay, then I'm going to need your help in trying to understand how that's possible. To me, the only way that an interview takes place with the 2 central witnesses and the subject of the investigation is if the decision has already been made that all 3 people in that room are not going to be charged.
Meanwhile, President Trump just this morning tweeted, quote, wow, FBI confirms report that James Comey drafted letter exonerating crooked Hillary along before investigation was complete. Many people not interviewed, including Clinton herself. Comey stated under oath that he didn't do this. Obviously a fix. Where is Justice Department? Oh, so blunt.
Well, this was raised in the hearing with General Sessions earlier, saying there were more problems with Jim Comey's decision not to seek the indictment of Mrs. Clinton than most people know about. If there were problems, then the Justice Department should examine those problems and do something about it. If the president wants the Justice Department to follow the evidence, take Jim Comey out of it, look at the evidence and follow it. Is it enough to seek an indictment, or is it enough to exonerate her? Then he should direct the Justice Department to do so.
Do you think he'll do that?
I don't know if he'll do so because he prefers to communicate via tweet. But I have to explain the significance of Jim Comey drafting an exoneration letter before all the evidence is in.
Or a conclusion letter.
Correct. And I will tell you this happens all the time. It's like a candidate on the morning of election writing a victory speech and a concession speech, and you don't know which way it's going to go. But in the case of a criminal investigation with a federal prosecutor, they usually know at the beginning of the investigation how it's going to end up, and they look for evidence to support those conclusions.
But I think the problem that Chairman Gowdy has here, and others do as well, is you have Comey basically testifying that he intentionally leaked information, which the Hill has reported, basically breaking the same protocols he criticized Hillary Clinton for doing, to force a special counsel investigation when his own credibility is called into question, given the fact that he has given testimony that seems to be contradictory to other things that he has said, not to mention the fact that he said he leaked the information after President Trump's tweets. Yet you look at New York Times articles, and clearly he had given that memo to his friend prior to when he said he did. And also, there's another layer of this as well that's not getting to discuss. Catherine Herridge brought it to the attention at the beginning of the show in her reporter hit, but the role of Fusion GPS, what they played, and that dossier in to a lot of the Russian investigation
She
as
mentioned
well.
it as being one of the things that triggered the investigation.
Like you, I will be very anxious to hear Comey's answers when they bring him back, as I'm sure they will. But he's probably going to say, when you asked me if I made up my mind before we interviewed
he's going to
her,
deny doing
I had a predilection which way I was going to go, but I didn't make a final decision until after
And would
the
that be
interview.
okay? Would that answer be okay?
It would not only be okay, it would be standard operating procedure.
Right,
Which
and
is
that's what I
key
wanted to get
right
to.
there, which
Yeah.
is key. And so I'm not going to defend Jim Comey. People on both sides of the aisle really hate him at this point, and sure, have him testify again. I'd love to hear some of these answers. But the judge just hit on a key point that if this is not unusual. This could be standard operating procedure, and there are more important issues that they need to be focusing on right now.
All right, I want to get to this because this happened a short time ago, and because it is in real time today, it gives us an opportunity to see what the Attorney General has to say about this. Let's watch it.
I don't think it's been fully understood the significance of the error that Mr. Comey made on the Clinton matter. For the first time I'm aware of in all of my experience, and I don't think I've heard of a situation in which a major case in which the Department of Justice prosecutors were involved in an investigation, that the investigative agency announces the closure of the investigation.
Judge?
So, General Sessions, do something about it. Reopen the investigation and reevaluate the evidence. If it was wrong for Jim Comey to make the decision not to prosecute, and I have harshly criticized Comey for it, tell us what the evidence is and do something.
Is it standard operating procedure, though? Because you had mentioned it's standard operating procedure sometimes for these individuals to come to a conclusion prior to some of the interviews.
Right.
But is it standard operating procedure when we've seen Comey give contradictory information under oath, to essentially lie under oath to the extent that he has?
Of course not. Of course not.
Well, and look, Ivanka and
That was
Jared.
a setup.
Ivanka
I
and
knew what the
Jared.
answer was going to be, but I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the judge's laugh. It's the greatest laugh in all the land.
But wait, let's also not forget, Ivanka and Jared recently were found to have had it set up a private email server and used a personal email to do government business. So let's also look at that. We have to have the same rules for everyone.
Well, did they use BleachBit to delete tens of thousands of emails destroyed?
Okay, so it's okay to do the
iPhones,
personal server for them?
computers. No, but my understanding is they also gave a
have the
statement,
same
and I believe those.
By the way, yes, it is, Marie.
But
The legal answer is yes, it is. They just have to disclose that they are using it.
And
not cover up. Clinton did not cover their track.
My understanding is they turned those didn't they turn those emails over?
Well,
I want to make sure I'm correct on that. I
Justice
believe
should
they
be
did.
looking into all of it.
Marie, you're stirring
And they
up
also didn't set up a
trouble.
private server as well. So
The
there are some key
BleachBit
differences.
is
Hey, where's the commissioner of football today?
No, he's talking today, by the way. We are waiting to hear from NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell as the winter meeting is wrapping up. And this after the league decided yesterday it would not require players to stand during our national anthem. How will this go over with fans and the president with plenty of thought on it, as you know already? We will bring you what's happening out of that meeting live. Stay close.
All right, we are awaiting Roger Goodell at a news conference happening in New York City. Obviously, any news that comes out of that is going to be incredibly important for this story. Judge Andrew Napolitano is sitting on the couch with us today, but this is after the decision not to require NFL players to stand for the national anthem. They suggest they do so, but it will not be a requirement. So we will go to Roger Goodell when this begins, Judge, but what do you expect?
I expect that the NFL owners will make a business judgment. And the choice is between impairing revenue, because taking the knee, though in my view constitutionally protected, is unpopular with their base, and punishing their best players who then may not produce the best work. And that business judgment is probably going to be, hey guys, do what you want. PS networks, don't put the cameras on them at this point. Show the cameras elsewhere, because I don't want to make a big deal out of it. That's what I think the compromise is going to be. But it'd be very interesting to see how Roger Goodell answers these questions.
The President Marie this morning tweeting, the NFL has decided that it will not force players to stand for the playing of our national anthem. Right. Total disrespect for our great country, he says.
Well, he's been trying to make it a question of patriotism, and the players say that that's not what it's about. It's about raising awareness of certain social issues that they want to talk about. So if the NFL were to try a middle path where they say, look, we want you to stand, but we're not going to force you to, and we're going to help our country have a conversation about these issues, I think that would be splitting and down the middle, where their players will be happy and maybe some of the business issues will
Who
not be
cares?
present.
No, the NFL is not a political entity. They shouldn't be getting involved in politics. And I think Roger Goodell has proven himself to be a complete and utter joke when he has an absolute double standard in the NFL. And Colin Kaepernick is able to wear socks without being punished, depicting police officers as pigs. Players are allowed to go on the field with fictitious arguments of hands up, don't shoot, don't get fined.
We set it up, and it's going to be happening any moment. We'll go to it when it begins live. More Outnumbered in just a moment.